Now, so far, we have seen Trump contradict the Fed, continually pointing the finger at the Fed, blaming the Fed, and getting the people to realize that when the Fed raises the rates, things start to fall apart. Then we had the Fed appear on 60 Minutes, telling us that they're responsible for the employment rate and keeping the banks stable and keeping prices stable. And of course, this appeared on a mainstream media outlet station on a show, and it was broadcasted to millions and millions of people. And again, when things go south, this could be replayed over and over and over, saying that they are responsible for this. Trump has been showing the world through the statistical information that the economy is doing absolutely fantastically. And we know from the real numbers that the economy never got any better since Obama. Actually, it was deteriorating since we came off the gold. Actually, if you go back even further, as soon as the central bank took control, we knew the economy was not going to do well at all. And this was back in 1913. Now, we were on some type of gold standard during the period of 1913 all the way up to the 70s, but we came off the gold standard in the 70s, which allowed the central banks to create currency like crazy. And since that time, well, the entire system started to implode. You didn't notice it in the beginning, but you notice it now. So Trump has to educate the American public on what the Federal Reserve really is. And we'll be getting into that in just a moment. But when we start to look at these numbers here, and we start to look at the reports on how the economy is actually doing, and I'm not talking about Trump's unemployment numbers, the stock market, GDP numbers. These numbers are for all those people who are sleeping. It's for the mainstream media. It's for the central bank. So none of these outfits can question what he's doing, because he's using their weapon against them. But if you go beyond this and you start to really look at what is going on, you can see the central bank was not a benefit to the American people. If you look at the millennial generation, they are deeper in debt than any other generation that has come before them. And coming out of the New York Federal Reserve, and if you notice, they always keep tabs, the central banks, on debt. They've revealed in a report that millennials have now racked up over $1 trillion of debt. Now, this is a troubling amount of debt. It's an increase of over 22% in just 5 years. And like we said before, it's more than any other generation in history. So how did it get this bad? Is it because of credit cards? Well, that's part of it, but not really. Many of the millennials who are out there don't have the high-paying jobs. A lot of them have cut back on what they can spend, and a lot of them don't own a house. So why are they so in debt? Well, it's student loans. The student loan debt is incredibly high. The latest student loan debt statistics for 2019 show how serious the student loan debt crisis has become for borrowers across all demographics and age groups. There are more than 44 million borrowers who collectively owe $1.5 trillion in student loan debt in the U.S. alone. Student loan debt is now the second highest consumer debt category, behind only to mortgages, and higher than both credit cards and auto loans. And you cannot default on the student loan. You have to pay it back. Well, you can default. There's other circumstances, but for the most part, you really can't. They'll always hold you to it. And if you try to default without having a really good reason, and they have a list of all the different reasons, you can't get a loan anywhere else. Your credit is kind of shot. So what we're seeing right now is that generation after generation has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And Trump, what he's doing right now, he is reversing everything the central banks, the deep state, have been doing for a very long time, putting our country further and further into debt. Now, a lot of people are out there saying, well, he's racking up a lot of debt too. Yes, he's using the central bank's money, the money that we borrow, against them. He's using it to bring back everything that they pushed away. Think about it for a second. How would you do it? If you know that the system is going to implode, you know that this system cannot last that much longer, you know that we're going to be going after the central bank, wouldn't you use their currency to undo everything that they've done? And I mentioned this before. Think about a person who's going to go bankrupt. They know they're going to go bankrupt. And what do? Do they stop spending? No. People that I know, they went out and they said, you know what? I'm buying a computer. I'm buying this. I'm buying that. Because when they file, guess what? They get to keep it all. They used that money and then wrote it off and said, listen, I'm out. Trump is doing the same exact thing. He's using all the funds from the central bank to undo what the central bank and the deep state have been doing for a very long time. Bringing the jobs back, building up the military, building up our infrastructure. And eventually what's going to happen, they're going to audit the Fed. They're going to show fraud. They're going to show a criminal organization not working in the best interest of the people. And we can see that this is where we are headed right now. Now, something very interesting. The banks right now, we know that the Fed is continually saying, oh, we run these stress tests and the banks look really strong and really great. And we know that banks have been purchasing their own stocks. Corporations have been purchasing their own stocks. And of course, they're purchasing other securities. And what we've come to find out is that U.S. banks, they're reporting a $251 billion of unrealized losses. What is an unrealized loss? Well, these are losses on securities that dropped in value, but the banks have not yet sold. In other words, they're paper losses. Every quarter in 2018 brought steep unrealized losses. The first quarter, $55 billion. The second quarter, $66 billion. The third quarter, $84 billion. The fourth quarter, $46 billion. What do you think is going to happen when everything reverses and we enter a crisis? Banks are going to be in trouble. Corporations are going to be in trouble. And these paper losses, well, most likely they're not going to be paper losses anymore. But we've seen this before. We've seen this back in 2008. Right now, what we're seeing almost equals what we saw back in 2008. And guess what happened then? The banks were in trouble. Remember all those bailouts? Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and the rest? They all needed to be bailed out. Actually, corporations needed to be bailed out because everything just completely fell apart. Now, Trump and the Patriots, they're working very, very hard to create these bilateral trade agreements, get rid of the globalist system, and reverse everything that they've been doing for many, many years. And Q has been telling us about the Rothschild, about how many central banks they own around the world, and it is quite a few. They almost have one of their private Western central banks in almost every single country. And why did they do this? Because by having a private Western central bank in every single country, they're able to extract vast sums of wealth from the nation via interest payments on 100% of the currency in circulation. The currency is issued to the nation as a debt instrument that the host nation must pay interest for using. This is the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. In the process, the nations all signed away their gold reserves to the Rothschilds as collateral. Actually, they signed it all away for a gigantic lie. And that brings me to Italy. Italy wants to use their gold. They want to use their gold to pay off debt and free Italy from the central bank, the Rothschild central bank system. So Deputy Prime Minister Salvini had this idea that he floated about using the people's gold to pay off the debt and freeing Italy from the clutches of the globalist central bank system. Guess what happened next? Bank of Italy's governor, Ignazio Visco, said the country's reserves of gold belonged to the central bank and could not be used to fund government spending. So what they just said was that the gold is no longer Italy's. It belongs to the central bank. It's no longer the people's gold. Now, I remember Ben Bernanke saying, gold is just this barbarous relic. We don't even use it. We don't even care about it. Again, remember, think mirror. Everything they say is always the opposite. And that brings me back to Q's post. This is post 1010. This is April 4th, 2018. And Q says, money, power, control. People are simply in the way. Slaves, sheep, pawns. Mass extinction events designed to decrease threat level of population. Gun control. Wars, fake, top-happy, back-end deal. Election rigging, control. Your voice does not matter. Water, air, chemicals push for home-use cleaning. Cancer, baby on floor, hands and mouth. The start. Vaccines, not all. Tobacco. Opioids, ultimate win. The Fed. Rothschild. Conspiracy, conspiracy, conspiracy. UK, Germany, 5 days. The choice is yours. Revelations. Enough is enough. And in this one post, Q kind of maps it all out, that this is what the Rothschild Central Bank wants. It wants control. It wants everyone as slaves. It wants everyone as sheep, and they don't care what happens to the people. Remember, the private West Central Bank system, they have no allegiance to a country, a group, or a people. The allegiance is to themselves and to debt. They don't care if they start wars. They don't care if a country is bankrupt. They don't care about any of this. They only need the people for a certain period of time. And once the population gets too big, their system doesn't work properly. Because as it comes to the end of their system and the population gets too big, the debt gets too big, and the debt levels outweigh everything else, and it crushes the economy. This is why, after 40 to 50 years, they have to restart their system. They have to shrink the population. They have to get rid of most of the debt. They have to have some type of an event to explain away why all this is happening. And they have to start it all over again. And this is what we're seeing right now. The problem is that they're no longer in control, and they're exposed. And the education for the American people has already started. Remember, Trump has been contradicting the Fed, getting everyone aware of what the Fed does and how it affects the economy. The Fed just appeared on 60 Minutes telling everyone that they're responsible for employment, full employment in the U.S. Well, when everything goes the opposite way, who's responsible? The Fed. And this was tweeted out by the White House on March 11th. All across America, hardworking taxpayers balance their household budgets, find ways to do more with less, and still manage to save for the future. Washington should treat their tax dollars the same way. President Trump's 2020 budget will do just that. Right now, with everything that we're seeing, a little bit at a time, Trump, the Patriots, they're educating the American people, because the message before this was the government can borrow as much as they want. It will never affect the government. We can have as much debt as we want. Nothing will ever happen. Well, that's ridiculous. Why is the government's currency, the government's debt, different than a household debt? There is no difference. It's exactly the same. And eventually what happens is that the weight of the debt becomes too great, and the amount of taxpayer receipts coming into the government dwindles, because we're in the opposite direction of when we first started this central bank system. What do you have? You have hardly any currency coming into the system. The debt is continually increasing, interest payments are rising, and it cannot be sustained. It's the same with a household. If you're making $50,000 a year and you keep taking credit cards out one after another, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, and you have 20 credit cards, don't laugh. I know some people that have about 20 credit cards. They're mixed up with store, other credit cards because they just kept rolling over the balances. And then they charge more on the other credit card. Pretty soon, you have $100,000 worth of debt and your income is $50,000. The same thing with the government. There's really no difference. Yes, the central bankers, they want us to think there's a difference, and they brainwash us into thinking that debt is good. The more debt the government puts on, it's fantastic. Nothing will ever happen if the government continually adds more and more debt. But guess what? Trump, the Patriots, they're telling everyone it does matter. We are at the end of a central bank system. It's about to implode on itself. And Trump and the Patriots, they're beginning the education process. And this will continue through the next elections to prepare the country for this transition.